Hello everyone, let's see if we can get this working. It's always an interesting question. Right then. Hello. How are we all doing today? Welcome to some more fun Naval History Live, which I've probably forgotten to advertise on Twitter, but frankly I've been having one of those days. Right then, let's see. We have got hello King George V, hi John Share, hi Carl van Gasberg, hi Jerison, hi Bijan, hi Richard Hughes, hi Blue Shirt Buddha, hi Stephanie. Hello, Albert. Hello, Carl. Hello, Danielle. Always good to see someone's name highlighted in blue. It means I don't have to worry about doing the whole moderation thing. Hi, Ian. Hi, Stephen. Hi, Greg. Hi, Jay. All having fun. Sound is fine and visuals. That's good. Everything's working. Sound fine. Yeah, it's got better slowly. It's just the thing was everything was pottling on quite nicely in my world as far as I was concerned. Then I got a note back going, no, and it's always like that. When you have a note that comes out of the blue, you thought there had been issues, but you thought you got part them and then suddenly you learn there's a whole new bunch of issues dropped in. It's just a case of. And as I said, I thought I'd been doing quite well, and it passed all my normal editing checks. So it's a joy. Like all dyslexics, I am a bit sensitive when it comes to certain things. And I suppose it's anyone, actually. When you've got something which you know is an issue, it makes you more sensitive when people raise it up. And most of the time, I'm fine. But of course, the book being the book, I took extra care. I had it checked, and I actually delayed it going to the publishers and had to fend off emails occasionally from publishers because I hadn't submitted it yet, because I wanted to get it more checked by the people who normally check my work for me, the people I trust. And yeah, then they come back and go, and it's got editing issues, and you're sort of going, lots of frigates and various other words come out of your mouth at that point. Just discovered a job I want to apply for. Has this application closed tomorrow? So frantically doing battle of NHS jobs website. Good luck. I have been on that website, and I have also used the civil service website occasionally for job applications, and they are both nightmares. Then Steve went, how's your French? Anyone from actual France ever knowingly understood you? Interesting. There is French and German debate going on here. All right. So, I think I have some. It's pronounced HMCS RCN, by the way. I wasn't quite sure how to pronounce it. I had Google and I went, that must be wrong. And actually, Google pronounced it differently than you did. So, you know. How's the floppy research assistant? Currently downstairs, declaring that he needs more fuss and more attention. He always needs more fuss and more attention. It's basically his standard modus operandi is, I need more fuss and I need more attention. And a lot of hugs. And that was quite funny. Is he ended up in the end of the second recording, which was of part 1, sitting in my lap. In the first recording of part 1, he actually wandered across and decided to sit in my lap at one point and then wandered off. So, you know. Jerison, your first book is your hardest. It is. It's learning the process. It's learning the whole process. And it's, as I said, It's having to learn the whole new process of the book system, whilst also having to deal with my own processes being as disrupted as they normally are. Because I don't consider myself a selfish person, but I have to admit, when I'm finishing off a major piece of writing, I do tend to be quite happy to pay for everyone else to go out the house and leave me on my own. And just think about it. And the trouble is, being on your own in your bedroom when everyone else is in the house trying to write is not the same as being on your own in the whole house, because things come up. And it's not... I have this debate, and it can go either way with my family sometimes, because, and I can understand their side. Life isn't like that. Life, things crop up. But when I'm on my own, I can ignore all those things and concentrate on the finishing off the writing and making sure it's smooth. When my family are here, they get upset about them, or they want them fixed, and they want them dealt with, and they notice them, so they do it. So it's basically a case of, when I'm on my own, I can stick my head in the sand and just ignore them all. And when I'm not, I can't. Then the book is your baby, except with an elephant-like gestation. Yes, they do have that. Mm-hmm. Sam Wilson, Abushabada, when you have time, check out part 1 where FRC plays Lapdog. Highly entertaining. Yes, he was actually sitting there complaining. He was lying on he has the whole bed to himself, right? There are a couple of books protecting my pillow, but that's mainly because if I don't protect the pillow end, he does literally stick his head between the two pillows at sometimes to just, extra comfort and snooze in a sort of okay place. And I don't really consider that hygienic, so my pillow is covered in books, which makes it very fun for me in the evening. But it keeps him away from it. But he has the whole bed otherwise, and he still decides he wants to come up into my lap. Then you could probably organise a rota of your viewers to offer him cuddles and attention while you're recording. I think actually there are a few people who would be quite happy to do that with him. Daniel Freeman to Shaw Mac, can I rely on you to do most of the moderating? I'm distracted this evening. NHS site, yes, concentrate on the NHS, Daniel. That's important. That's your job. I'm sure Sean will do an excellent job. Hi, Sean. Now, I have some more announcements of bilge pumps. In that, I can say that Michael Clapp not only enjoyed it so much, I think we're going to have him back at some point in the future, not just on next week's, but on future ones. But Michael, I have known for many years, and I do know the ultimate proof of when Michael likes someone is when he starts introducing and suggesting other people to do it. Come on it. Because as I think I mentioned before, Michael has a little black book which is full of all sorts of interesting people he's met and has talked to over the years, and he's sponsored. And the little black book has opened up, and there are all sorts of names and recommendations coming to the Bilge Pumps cruise for future guests and people to have on, and topics and fun things to talk about. And it's sort of a case of, well, this makes it kind of easier for us to organize some very high-profile guests coming up in the future. So that could be pretty darn interesting, what's coming. I think Jamie, who is, of course, is from a journalistic background, it was a bit shocked when he saw it happen and he got the email and he was connected to these people, because he was going, usually I have to fight quite hard to get sources and people to talk to me, and yet for bilge pumps, because Michael Clapper says it's good and it was fun and we were nice, we're getting all these people. Yes, this is the way. Ben Gurring, are we discussing who's the goodest boy? No, it's my my puppy. The fluffy research assistant is definitely the one I'm putting forward as the goodest. Morgan Cox, my dogs are intensely social. When resting between forages, they're often in touch with each other, resting, rolling, scratching, and in my case, my dog's case, lying in my lap going, hello, give me a bicky. Right then, so we look at it. What's today's topic? Before, as we've sort of been talking about all these things, but we'll go to today's topic a bit more. It's the pre-tribals, the RN's next generation, what they were building after World War One. And this is what's often forgotten: is that World War One is not this easy thing for the Royal Navy to get over. They have a lot of stuff to synthesize. They've had Jutland, they've had all sorts of battles, and there's also been the Harwich Force. Now, you will have heard my lament on many occasion that if destroyers' battle honours were awarded like battleships' battle honours are, which is they just have to fire their guns and it seems it's suddenly a battle, the destroyers would have battle honours on the order of 10 to 12 times the size of a battleship. Well, the Royal Navy starts synthesizing this information early in the post-First World War period. And they basically stopped building destroyers for 6 years. Think about that. If you heard that America was going to stop building, I don't know, it's any ship pretty much for 6 years, other than the aircraft carriers and the major capital units. Let's say they were going to keep submarines and they were going to keep aircraft carriers in construction. We're going to stop everything else for 6 years, while they think and look at existing designs, not do anything new, just look at existing designs before they design something, before they go to the next generation. It would be unheard of. But that's what the Royal Navy did. For starters, they built so much during the First World War they could afford to. They didn't have to worry about replacing old stock with new stock. They had so much stuff which had been it was pretty much brand new anyway. It didn't matter. But also, the Royal Navy had the confidence it could do it. It was weird, number one. You know, the nicest way anyone else having to build up to our standard. We do it. They won't get that. We'd start building before they did. Yes, Carol Gunham. Yes, generic ones like the Battle of the Atlantic. Yeah. Or the Battle of the Mediterranean, or the Battle of the Indian Ocean. Just going, that was a very long battle, lasting a long time, but that's just because they're all destroyers taking part, no battleship blasting away at something. Let's see, let's reduce the mic gain. Oh, mic is at its lowest, so it should be okay. Hello? No, that's higher. Low. How about I do this instead? I'll just move it a bit further away from me. Oh. Now, pretty much, the Royal Navy takes a 6-year gap, and that doesn't mean they aren't doing anything, though. They are exercising destroyers something chronic. They are putting them through all the training they can think of, putting them through all the development they can think of. And, by the way, I really love this little book. Even though it does forget the C-class flotilla exist. And it's because it does things like this. So, you have if I put this up here, you have stats, ships built, their stats, their design, modifications, and service. For every single class, looking at all the individuals. Now, it isn't necessarily exhaustive, but it's a lovely book to start off with as your basis for looking through them. Also, I like the fact it always has a little plan. It's nice to have a little plan. It allows you to make sense of the pictures sometimes, because they have done too good a work with the various other accoutrements they have added in. But it's one of those scenarios, you know, the Royal Navy has to look at around the world, and they have to start deciding how they're going to make destroyers work for it. Because the debate in the immediately post-interwar period, post-World War I period, is whether or not destroyers are things for major fleets only and to be used or are they things to be used around the world. It's a big debate, and it affects the size of the ship you're building. And yes, as we sort of write, a lot of V&W ships go into reserve at the end of World War I to serve in World War II. But let's consider the difference in size between the V&Ws. Right, the later on VWs were 1,200 tons. They had to be extensively modified to get them to do long range. Most of them had a range of 3,500 nautical miles at 15 knots, which is not enough for Atlantic work. And that was actually after they'd been converted to wear conversions. As built, nowhere near that. Even the long-range V&Ws. And one of the interesting things is the V&W conversions are all worked out in the interwar period. They are worked out in the 1930s before they even have to deal with it. But they are worked out, and they're... Let's see, their range... That's helpful. It doesn't list the range here. I thought it did. Nope, no range there. That's no. But you start to look at it, what the Royal Navy is looking for building for next, what the Royal Navy is thinking about. And that is why there's the gap, because the Royal Navy has to make this decision. What are they going to be building destroyers for? What kind of war are they going to be fighting? So, here's the thing. The Royal Navy are having to start working out what World War II is going to look like when World War I is hardly over. In 1920s, they are figuring out what World War II is going to look like and what they are going to have to do to fight in it. What kind of things they are going to need to fight in it. Hey, June and 119 on... Strub, if a convoy had a confirmed kill and that counted as a battle, how many convoy battles do you think there would be? Thousands. Thousands. Inkar, how did they miss C-Class? Blame the publisher. Basically, it's not the C-Class cruisers, it's the C-Class destroyer flotilla they miss. It's basically HMS Kempenfeld and the C-Class. But this has been published a while, this book, and I picked it up for 20 quid. It's by M.J. Whitley, the same gentleman who did my cruiser encyclopedia I like to use. And it's good. It's a lovely book. Barring, as I said, Seagull, it's got pretty much every navy in there. That's got destroyers World War II, and that's what I like, because I like ships like this, the books like this, because it allows me to compare them all. Because it's got Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Greece, Netherlands, Norway, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Siam, Soviet Union, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, USA, Yugoslavia. It has got them all in here. And that's useful. Because even if there are mistakes and issues in here, because it's put all of them into the same format, it allows a far better comparison to be made between the different nations and between the different destroyer designs. Now, the C-Class do end up in Canada under the thing, but I don't think they end up in under the Canada chapter. Because they don't get to Canada until they're built by Britain. You're right, but he's not called them the River class either. He's called them the Fraser class. That's why I missed him. That's the other thing. He does sometimes invent names of classes. Fraser, St. Laurent, Restigouche, and Ottawa are all, yeah. Yeah. He's not, they are, yeah. You were right. He does have the class in here. They're just under the Canadians, and instead of calling the River class, he's called them the Fraser class. Hey, caramba. The man's causing me stress. Turning 3434. Why did the US go for flush decks in that case, or is that a case of totally out of place nostalgia for monitors? No. Remember, think about what the Royal Navy's building to fight in. The North Sea and North Atlantic and the Pacific. So, all those North Sea and North Atlantic case and the South Atlantic, they're all fairly rough oceans. But in the North Sea, you don't have a lot of space to maneuver comparatively. You want to get your maneuvering right, because there are lots of nations around who are going to be putting out lots of minefields. So you need to combine something which has good weather keeping, with good sea keeping, and also good maneuverability. So, as Drax's been talking about in his Dreadnought work, you can worry about the front going too low in the water and not come out, because as the ship's moving along, and the shape of the bows and all these things and how you do it. So if you actually raise up the bow artificially a level, you've got to do it on a limited tonnage, so this is why the British do it the way they do. But if you raise it up like that is, it gives you a higher foredeck to go through the water, gives you better sea keeping in terms of keeping the guns dry so they can fire. That's the idea. It's supposed to make more, but also provide even more protection for the torpedoes back, so that the water is less likely to come cascading onto them. So will keep the torpedo deck as dry as possible, so that you can swivel the torpedoes around and fire them. It's all about operating the torpedoes in the end, especially with Ambuscade. But the Americans go flush decks because the Americans are looking at the Pacific, and to an extent the Atlantic as well. And for them, what they'd want to do is they'd rather build up and have that, but also they tend to have the Royal Navy ships, as I've always understood, and looking at designs have been backed up with this, tend to have a denser framing than the US Navy ships, which makes for a slightly heavier hull. The Americans have slightly less framing, but they go up higher and they keep it as a flush deck. Sound is scratchy again. I have no idea why. Let's see. Is that better? Let's see. That better. Da-da-da-da-da. Hopefully that is better, because that hopefully keeps the sound down. Is that better? Juno 191. How would you rate the Flower class and Canadian corvettes? Also, thoughts on the movie Greyhound? Have you seen it? Not seen the movie yet. And corvettes and Flower class and Canadian corvettes. I think I've already done a video about them, but I quite like them. But it's destroyers today that I get in the full attention. But they are quite corvettes are good, useful little ships. In car. There was a lot of interwar interwar regarding the banning of submarines by treaty, which presumably also impacted destroyer planning. Yes, because you had lots of people talking about banning the submarines, but that is probably the problem. I am probably a bit too sort of, I have to have it so it works when I go down, because I go down, and also have it works when I go up. Basically, when it comes to destroyer design, the Royal Navy and other navies are always hoping for banning of submarines because they make their life easier, but they are not planning for it. Amazon is a classic example of this. Bill of Thornycroft. Order the 16th of July 1924, not contracted till August. It's not unusual for them to order it and then not contract. They take their times. They try and make things, make sure they're getting the best deal. And they send it to Thornycroft, who are naturally some of the best destroyer builders in the world. Complement 138, 4 4.7-inch guns, 2 2-pounder gun anti-aircraft guns, 6 21-inch torpedoes. Pretty much she will set the mold for all the destroyers to come after her. Both of these ships were. They're they're going to have 2 torpedo launching systems. Whether they have a treble, a quadruple, a quintuple mount, they will have 2 of them up until you get to the tribals. They will have the 4.7-inch gun. Why? It's good. And at this time, remember, there are 2 big threats the destroyers are supposed to be able to fight. 2 big threats. Other destroyers and torpedo boats, and aircraft with their guns. Okay? Aircraft, they are told the major threat the Royal Navy keeps being told is going to be level bombing from heavy bombers coming in to attack the capital ships, because honestly, that's the only thing you're going to try and attack with a heavy bomber coming in straight, because there's not a single chance of anything else still being in the same position or in roughly the same area when your stick of bombs hits the ground when you're a heavy bomber. So you're going to work for you're not going to bother with the destroyers. So this is what's governing the Royal Navy in its terms of decision making. Danny Freeman, I think, but far from excellent, that the problem is you need you move around closer and further away from the microphone. You need a clip-on mic that will move with you, and probably a friendly sound tech to help too. That is luckily what I had when I was doing Mysteries of the Deep. And actually, might be going to be doing a German castle program as well, which I'm looking forward to. Richard Hughes, please remember to social distance from your mic. Yes, I will try to. It's got a mask to protect it. I'm trying my best here. Ian Carr, why were specialized destroyer builders allowed sometimes to develop their own take on iron designs? Thornycroft and plus cool. Camel Ed, Thornycroft, Swan Hunter, JS Cow, JS what are they called? JS cows, I think. Possibly. They all develop their own takes. In fact, I am honestly putting in stats here, and I know they are wrong. I've got the stats for HMS Codrington. I know those are correct, because that's for one ship she's built by Swan Hunter. She is the first destroyer leader of the first class built. And that's the really interesting thing. I love that the Royal Navy have this habit of naming... We've got the A-class flotilla. Yes, all of them will be named after A's, but we will call the flotilla leader HMS Codrington after an admiral who served with Nelson. Yes, that is what we all do. That is how we will roll. And it's lovely. It's a good little ship. And again, it's... I love the fifth. Here's the thing. The destroyer leaders are built with 5 4.7-inch guns. And you can sort of see it, especially if I expand this out. Adam, if you look in the middle between the two stacks, the two funnels, there is a little gun. That is another 4.7-inch gun. Now, the thing is, we all know destroyers are pretty much another version of ambush predator. But their thing is to dash in, turn the last minute, launch their torpedoes, and then dash away. So basically, you have a gun which is only going to be opened up on the enemy for the short time while you're turning as leader. None of your other destroyers will have it. You are allowed to be confused by that as an idea. Honestly, I think that is tonnage they could have saved, but they had space, so they put it in. Myself, if I had been them, I'd have probably said add some extra 40mm. Ignore the extra desire to have an extra 4.7-inch gun. I might have even gone, let's go for a 4.5 with an actual ability to actually elevate up. Because, here's the thing. Theoretically, B-mount, the Codrington and Fur were supposed to be able to go to 60 degrees, which is about this one, at this point. None of the guns really could go past 30, 40 degrees at this point. As we all know, in World War II, for high-angle AA, you need 70, 80, 85. Wouldn't mind 90, but 85 will do. And probably more sensible to stop shells falling directly back onto your ship. Daniel Freeman, my parents met work at BBC, hence I have picked up a bit of understanding of these things, but have gone a very different route. Good for you. Richard Hughes, 49 watching and only 15 likes. Well, that suggests I'm doing quite well, because 30% of the people watching like me. I wouldn't mind if more liked me, though, so please do like. Daniel Freeman, Juno 191. Didn't the Treaty of Versailles mess with ASW development in Britain? No. There's lots of rumours around it. There's lots of reasons given for why ASW doesn't develop as well as it should do in the interwar period, but the reality is the British are developing ASDIC, and they are testing it under exercise conditions. And it's only when you get into a war scenario that some of the problems with these things start to show up. Because... as I think I made in the point in the introduction part 2, exercises only go so far. The stakes in exercises are different than the stakes in a wartime. The risks you'll run in wartime to try and get that kill versus the risks you'll run in peacetime. The actual capabilities of the weapons, and this is a big thing which comes through. You're going to love next week's bilge pumps when it comes out. You're going to absolutely love some of the stuff we get talking about Glatt, because one of the big things he points out is that the weapons which are marketed as one way and are given all these figures in actual real-time operations work very differently. They still work, but they're nowhere near as effective. And if you think, well, how did you program your wargaming? How did you program your exercises? Do you program it based on your experience in terms of those exercises and in terms of the stated claims of the capabilities of weaponry? That's what you do. The trouble is, the reality is different. A class, 6 out of 10 lost. Just think about that. 60% of that class lost in World War II. It's 33 for free, but if you sneak into guarded harbours, torpedo your capital ships in port and get away with it, you are doing something wrong. Technically, yes, but in reality, again, when it happens to the Royal Oak in Britain, the reason it happens is largely because something which had been thought to be a practical and would work didn't work when someone's prepared to run the risks. In exercises, the Royal Navy ship for a Royal Navy submarine to run the risk to get in there is potentially dying for what? For an exercise? Even the most youngest, most bravest submarine commander on an exercise is possibly not going to do that. But for a German submarine commander who is going for a kill and for glory, running that for a risk is worth it. The trouble is theory in Daniel Freeman, theory or practice. The trouble is theory informs the practice. So the theory of the weapons will inform the practice with them and inform the wargaming and the estimates. And that is the trouble when you're developing anti-submarine warfare. If you're developing something, think about it. Anti-submarine warfare in World War One advances a lot, but is still very, very underdeveloped compared to what will happen in World War Two. And it advanced in the 20 years in between, but it won't advance anywhere near as much as it will advance between 1940 and 1944. In those 4 years, ASW warfare will go from here to up here. We'll start off that period with depth charges coming off rails and throwers. We'll finish that period with hedgehog and squid anti-submarine mortars. It's a big difference what gets developed. Cargannon, in the World War I RNS class had guns between the funnels. Yes, lots of people had the idea the gun between the funnels wasn't a good place to put an extra gun. Again, with a destroyer, it's not supposed to be broadside to its enemy for very long, so frankly, I'm not that keen on it, but you know. Then Freeman, this clock, middle gun on destroyer leaders. If they are leading in line astern, then would turn away, discharging smoke and shooting, and everyone else would be following but hidden. Pretty much that was the idea. But I'm not sure whether it was practical. How were destroyer flotillas expected to operate as a team? And how was the flotilla leader supposed to coordinate with the other destroyers? Well, honestly, quite a lot of the coordination takes place using flags. They do try radio signals, they do use signaling lamps, all these sort of things, but they also use flags still, quite heavily. And the whole point, the destroyer leader often would be at the front in line astern, but it could also be in the center in line abreast, which is an interesting formation to go to. And it could get them to form up as wings on either side of it. And of course, as we all know, during the interwar period, the British start to develop the box methodology for how destroyers would follow certain major surface units at night, where there'd be one in each coordinate around it, and one playing ready to pop in. And if you had 8, you put them all around it. Sort of, I think when they worked out at 8, you average in at sort of, let's see, that's 30 degrees, and then there would be 120 degrees left, which is 12.5 plus 2.5 is 15. So every 45 degrees around the target would be a destroyer waiting to come in, and that's called the full box. But it's developing still. A lot of destroyer tactics are being developed, and that's not the reason they hold off on building them for 6 years, because they're working out what the tactics are going to be in the next year as they sort of try and synthesize different lessons from the convoy destroyers, from Jutland, from Harwich Force. All these forces had very different experiences of World War II, had developed very different operating modus operandi and very different concepts of destroyer operations. And it was to try and build it all together to work out what would be the modus operandi in a future war. And it was very quickly, once you realize that a Battle of Jutland is very, very unlikely to be repeated, you start to focus in quite quickly on Harwich and on the convoys. But the trouble is, in many ways, the Harwich and the convoy force experience are the two furthest apart. The Grand Fleet experience is part convoy, part Harwich. It sort of sits squarely in the middle. But once you realise that your wars are going to be different, it's different. And yes, HMS Keith. Which is an HMS Keith, if I'm not remember correctly. That's HMS Collett again. I forgot to change that. But I've got Keith. I got Keith. That is HMS Keith. Right. Danny Freeman, who put the thumbs down? I didn't know there was a thumbs down. Thomas, good day to you all. Hi, Thomas. Have just viewed part 1 of the intro. Looking forward to part 2. Meanwhile, yeah. Oh. Ooh, Bill Trumps. Right, and let's see. Any more questions? Calvin Guzman, PQ turret on DD. I think those mounting positions got used big time in small boat actions in World War One. That was the thing. That was the thinking about them. But also, it got used. It was to an extent. Those positions were part of the approach going through when it came to not necessarily the Harwich experience, but some of the convoy experience in the close waters when you're dealing with submarines on the surface. Because you don't know from which quarter the submarine's going to appear. And that gives you an extra weapon to cover quite a large area. And if you have multiple submarines, that's because remember, Britain is also experimenting this time itself with what basically would be Wolfpack tactics, what we call them, i.e. group submarine hunting of convoys in exercises. And this is another reason why destroyer leaders get those extra guns. Ian Carl, 3 A-class destroyers were fighting against German capital ships. Akatis, Hipper, Acastor and Ardent, Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. Yep. The A-class had a really tough war. They were given escort. It's quite interesting that they were given the carrier escort roles quite often. And you start to wonder why, and you realise very quickly that they have been regulated even by that time. And they're what? 15 years? By the time they're sort of there, they're what? They've been in service 10 years, a decade or so, and they're being relegated to what are considered for the destroyers at this time important guard roles, but not anti-submarine roles. And this is because the A-class were not considered that good anti-submarine vessels. They would be used a lot for it by needs of World War II, but, you know, they were still not considered that great. Second at Reading, Admirals in Collision. That exercise had important effect on a turn on off descent. Royal Navy Command and Engineering course. 300 died in the sinking of HMS Victoria. At Reading, Admirals in Collision. Ooh. Yeah, lots of issues happen. Common Government, World War II, AFW World War II starts with depth charges on racks, ends with acoustic sinking torpedoes too. Yes, there is a big difference in how World War II develops. Also, one of the big issues that they never realize in peacetime, when they're doing an exercise, how do they mark that they've found a submarine? They don't drop depth charges. That might sink one of your own submarines. They drop a grenade into the water. So you don't lose contact with the submarine for that long, and you're presuming the depth charges are going to work. Richard Hughes. Do any of the pre-troubles have expendable bowels? Off the top of my head, I can't remember any which lost their bow and got them replaced. A lot of them got sunk. B class, 4 of 8 lost. So that's 50% of the class went down. And again, it's a lot of these ships get sunk before 1942 is over. 1942 is this major year in World War II terms, in that if a ship gets through 1942, its chances of survival seem to go way up. Jermac, middle gun. Germans also did it on Elbings? Yep. Type 39. Juno 1191. That's Clark, a little off topic, but would the British do something that the Japanese did and make a cruiser that had 40 torpedoes as an air denial weapon? Unlikely. The Japanese were very, very focused on a long lance torpedo and a torpedo as a sort of system as for that sort of cruiser and that capability. The British wouldn't really do that because they would think, well, how's that cruiser going to fit? Where will we operate that cruiser? Will that cruiser be available when we need it? What would we be using that cruiser for? In the end, the Royal Navy would rather have a general purpose cruiser, which has a few torpedoes on anyway, and have the destroyers for the torpedo role so the cruiser can do the cruiser roles. Because really, the Royal Navy needs the cruisers, as many cruisers can get for the cruiser roles. In fact, so many does it need cruisers that it builds some destroyers for the cruiser roles, the tribals. Ben Grogan, Dr. Clark, could the Amidships 4747 be for discouraging flanking torpedo boats while closing with a target in more coastal waters? It can certainly be used for that. There are lots of ways it can be used, but honestly, there is a reason it's only really fitted to the destroyer leaders. It can be used, and it sounds good for the destroyer leader, which is going to be a slightly bigger vessel anyway, to accommodate all the things it needs to be a flotilla leader. But you don't. If it was so useful, you would fit it to all of them, but you don't. Bruce Marino, wasn't the US flush deckers also easier and quicker to build and stronger per ton than ships with large forecastles? Plus, all the exercise one gets walking up the hill to Bell. Thanks, Woodward. I would say under peacetime conditions, the destroyers take about the same amount of time to build. During World War II, when the Americans are really pumping everything they can into their shipyard programs, and the British shipyards are straining under the weight of bombing and all sorts of things, I would say the Americans do get quicker at building. But I don't necessarily think that's down to design. I think that's just they have the manpower and they're able to do it. I would say flush deck is better in certain conditions. The Royal Navy step deck is better in other conditions. It depends on how you're planning on operating your ships. As I think, one isn't intrinsically better than the other. There is no prize, no you have done the best design, you've done the second best design. It's a case of you have done the best design for you. Hooray, that fits your requirements. You have done the best design for you. Hooray, that fits your requirements. And that's the thing. If you look at what the Royal Navy are using their destroyers for around the world and how they're operating, the step deck design works very well for what the British want to do with them. See, right, Salmon DD actions turn for the USN as it got better adjusted to using and trusting radar. But Japanese battle practice at night paid off big time in earlier actions. Yeah, that's true. So, if the US built flush decks for use in the Pacific, why didn't the Japanese do it too? With their lightish build, wouldn't flush decks be stronger in a full Pacific ship? Again, it depends on what you want out of it and what you're planning on doing with it. The Japanese... Well, I was just thinking, where are my pictures of Japanese destroyers? And I sort of then went, hang on, no, I've got them here. Right. So, the Japanese do sort of go with a, what I would call a semi-flush deck design. They have a sort of flush deck hull line, but they do have a stepped insert on it. And the reason they go for this is they're building for a certain strength, but also for a certain operation. When you're building, it's what are you building your destroyers for? That's the thing. The Royal Navy is building their destroyers to cruise around the world. The Americans are building them for the Atlantic and the Pacific, and to very much as part of their torpedo force. Japanese also as part of their torpedo force, but they're starting to look at gunfighting with their destroyers a lot earlier in terms of fighting. So there's advantages, especially from the gun roll, to having a step design because it keeps the guns that much higher and clear out the water. Golden Eagle, what destroyers were used for dynamo? Pretty much every destroyer that was available. That's it. Mostly the older ones. Mostly the ones we're talking about, the pre-tribals. But, you know, it's pretty much every destroyer used. Available. Rob Marsh, was it hard to get crew for destroyers? Not exactly great survival rates overall, and presumably some of the sloops went down pretty quickly. Some of the ships went down pretty quickly. Not that hard. Destroyers were considered an elite within the Navy, and despite their losses, they were always considered a bit of an elite. And because it was a smaller crew, the camaraderie and all these things, so destroyers were always fairly good for getting their crews. Fairly popular. A lot nicer in many ways. William Cox, don't worry about the up and down responses. Just address your topic and the recommends in real time. You already won the popularity contest, or we'd have gone elsewhere. Oh, that's nice. A lot of the ships do go down quite quickly. Sure, Dr. Indian Warriors, if you're commanding a group of destroyers, how many do you need to take on 2 capital ships? Most of the exercises you're talking, if you're taking on capital ships, you're talking about a flotilla per ship. So you would be expecting to be attacking with 18 odd ships. That's 2 destroyer leaders and 16 destroyers to take on 2 capital ships. If you're HMS Glowworm, of course, you just think, hooray, there's a target, I'm coming for you. If you're most of the trouble is that there is, again, it's the exercise. In exercises, the destroyers are available. We have all this fleet and all this formation, and they can do this. In wartime, the reality is destroyers are all over the place doing all sorts of missions. It's what's available, goes for it. It's what finds the enemy, goes for it. And that's why you have Bismarck being harried by 5, a new strength flotilla. Because that's the other thing. In World War II, suddenly flotilla strengths get halved. Suddenly your flotilla becomes, on average, 4 to 5 destroyers, rather than the 8 it has been. So you can have more flotillas. So you deploy them around more. And that's not because we've had so many losses. It's because we want to deploy them more. Yes. And we're producing mixed destroyer flotillas. That's not because, again, we've had so many losses we can't deploy the proper strengths we need where it is. It is because it's produces the best operational processes. Yes, it doesn't create any infrastructure and support and logistics issues at all. Um, In card, there does not seem to have been a Harwich force World War II. Strange in view of France, Belgium, Holland being occupied. There was, but it was motor torpedo boats. And again, the thing is, the part of the Harwich force had been about protecting the channel so that the convoys between the UK and France could keep going. If you don't have to protect the convoys to France, well, then you don't really need the Harwich force as much. Emmett, so the Harwich force and convoy force drove development armed destroyers during the interwar period. Yes. Why not the BCF, since they were constantly engaging and chasing down it? Because the battlecruiser forces destroyers were pretty much ignored. Largely because the battlecruiser forces destroyers had often ended up finding themselves folded into the Harwich force. So their experiences were folded into them. Or they were folded into the Grand Fleet. And because of the way, especially BT had used them, or rather not used them, they hadn't really achieved anything which set themselves apart on the scale of things. There are I-class. Operation Dynamo includes a lot of destroyers. If I look up the list, I've got it somewhere on here. We're going to be discussing Operation Dynamo. I'm going to get my notes up for it. The Royal Navy destroyers at Dunkirk: HMS Anthony, Basilic, Codrington, Esk, Express, Gallant, Grafton, Grenade, Greyhound, Harvester, Havant, Icarus, Impulsive, Intrepid, Ivanhoe, Jackal, Jaguar, Javelin, Keith, McKay, Malcolm, Montrose, Sabre, Saladan, Scimitar, Shikari, Vanquisher, Vega, Venomous, Verity, Vimy, Vivacious, Wakeful, Whitehall, Wetshed, Wild Swan, Winchelsea, Windsor, Wolfhound, Wolsey, and Worcester. So there were a few of them. And a fair number of them unfortunately ended up sunk. Which is always annoying. Eamon, is the midships gun Q or P, and how do you differentiate between the P and Q position? I was always taught it differentiates depending on its positioning between the funnels, but I think if in doubt you call it P, and then if you have a second one, it's Q. Excellent. HMS Bulldog is adorable. Yeah, they all are. They're all rather cute. I have to say, I liked the B class. I liked looking at them. And they're the first ones fitted with sonar as built, with ASDIC, as it's called, Type 1109. Which, again, there is going to be some probably go, no, but this class was fitted with a Type 119CF, which was in World War II suddenly called a Type 121. And I'm going, yes, but in the interwar period, The Royal Navy very specifically lists them as being fitted with the Type 119 Aztec. And this is very specific. The Royal Navy pretends that Aztec isn't developing. It's a nice way of sort of covering up your progression by not calling it something new. That's actually quite a clever idea when you think about it. Golden Eagle, why didn't the British build DDs up to tonnage limitations? They did. In terms of numbers of destroyers, they did. The Royal Navy was concentrating on numbers over size. If you build up to the size, you get less numbers, and the Royal Navy always needs numbers as well. It has to balance it. It's always a balancing act of, do we have enough ships, and are they capable enough? So that's why I said I think it's in part 2, or possibly in part 1 of the introduction, they can only have it. You have to build it so it's good enough that it isn't completely outclassed by other nations' destroyers, but is small enough you can build them in numbers to do all the jobs you need them to do. Excellent. Did you truly grant honorary tribal status to the USS Johnson? Yes, I did. She is considered an honorary tribal. And that's why I made the T sign. That's the tribal sign as far as I'm concerned now. William Cox. Kageru and Fubuki versus Fletcher and Sumner. Ouch. Ouch. I think probably the Fletcher comes out alive, but I'm not sure about the rest of the three. Choose. Which is your favorite pre-World War II destroyer? I have a soft spot for HMS Duncan. I'm not sure why, but she's just a plucky little flotilla leader. And she comes along here. I think we're almost up to her. Yeah, that's HMS Duncan. She's just cute. She does so many good operations in World War II, and she does so much. And she's forgotten. And this is why I thought the Type 45 should be named Duncan class rather than Daring class. Japanese do come with some cool names, but I think every nation has a good reason for its naming policies. I have to admit, I sometimes wonder about the American ones, but quite a lot of the island nations come with cool names. William Cox, USN dedication to the dual-purpose main battery made our DDs very useful. Yes, it did, but you have to remember the British and the Americans both have the same dedication to the general-purpose battery. It's just the Americans, by the time they enter war in 1941, they've seen 2 years of war experience to make modifications to their ships. If the Royal Navy, if you consider the 4.5-inch mounting that's coming through, if the Royal Navy hadn't started war till 1941 as well, you would have probably seen the 4.5, and certainly considering the number they were churning out in the wartime, they could have done this, would have gone out and replaced quite a lot of the 4.7s on quite a lot of the ships. So that it's the case of, if war hadn't been come in 1939, and if they hadn't realized it was going to come in 1939 and started making decisions based on that, but actually they'd found themselves fighting war in 1941, you would have seen the Royal Navy have a lot more 4.5s out, which would have made different. By the time, it's that evolution. It's when war starts for you. It's why I don't like it when people go, the Royal Navy, when they enter war, are less capable than the US Navy. And you go, well, actually, no. If the Royal Navy had entered war at the same time, it would have been. You compare the US Navy of 1939, they're roughly about the same in terms of their capabilities going at. Yes, they do have a few bit, but if you go back to 1938, they're pretty much level pegging. When 1939 comes in and the British are sort of looking at going, sugar, we need to maximize numbers out quickly because war's going to be hitting us shortly. And they start making decisions based on that. That then changes how they're approaching things, while the Americans get to develop a bit more. Hi, KGV. Yes, Hood is in here. RN anti-submarine forces became much stronger and destroyer flight strength likewise gained better weaponry from 1942 onwards and better tactics for all the situations. To an extent, yes, but it's the numbers that really start to matter. Yes, the weapons come in are better, but if you consider what most of the losses to were in between 1939 and 1942, it's not. It's the situations they find themselves in. Juno 9191, that's fuck. Bismarck got trolled by a Polish destroyer. The Polish DD was flashing on pole. Good or bad tactic? Well, it annoyed him, but there again, Bismarck also had 4 tribals to deal with, so there's only so much they can deal with at the same time. Vision, are there still destroyer frigate flotillas today, or does their cruiser size mean they operate and organize as they make them operate and be organized as destroyers? They're sort of. They are grouped officially in flotillas, but they don't really operate in flotillas as this period. They are now operate far more like RN cruiser squadrons used to, in which case the ships are usually off solo wandering and they only get together when they need to. Whereas in this point, it was rare that you saw a single destroyer out. They usually would operate in pairs, if not 4 or 8. Vision. Captain Ryoko Asman at JMCF recently became the first woman officer to command a 4-ship squadron in Japan. It was the first escort division, and her flagship was the Izumo helicopter carrier. Ooh, cool ship. And good on for her. Ian Carr, were there treaty limits that applied to the V&W destroyers in reserve before World War II? Not really, because, well, yes, theoretically the treaty limits applied to them. They were grouped into total tonnage, and they were they couldn't be over the tonnage, but as they weren't, it really didn't matter as far as anyone was concerned. Calvin Gasboat. Small DDs good enough to hold their own against contemporaries, but can be built in numbers, so they might gang up in numbers on individually better ships. Bingo! Rather like the Royal Navy did and was planning in terms of cruisers. Vision, William Cox. I wondered flotilla squadrons if they work as a close-knit combat group like in Model 1, Model 2, or is it more an organizational group as opposed to a mini-fleet? Pretty much it's an organizational group more than a mini-fleet. Hi, Jeff. William Cox. Today's task group is an integrated network rather than gangs of little like types running about. Although the gangs of like types running about would be quite cool to see at some points. I could just imagine a gaggle of Nimitz bullying the Lone Ford or something like that. Juno, USS JFK, Ford class carrier, when she went into the bottle, didn't on the first swing. Isn't that bad luck? It's not really great, but we'll cross fingers for her. We also cross fingers for all the nations which oppose America in the future, because if they're the ones who sink the JFK, God help them. Pigeon, I think facts are more like old-time destroyers. They often operate as a group to attack en masse. Yes, but the trouble is they also have torpedo boats and motor gun boats as their predecessors. So, that's the thing. They cannot say they operate in packs because of that. And really, that's closer to them than destroyers. Richard Hughes, trolling is fun. Who have you been trolling today? William Hughes, geez, I remember the USS Yellowstone. It was our flotilla support ship. She almost never left Charleston Port, leading to the nickname Yellow Rock. That is the problem when you are a flotilla ship, and that's the thing which decides whether ships were grouped into a flotilla or whether they were a squadron. If they needed the support of a flotilla ship, headquarters ship, this sort of a support ship which comes for them, and that's what submarines and destroyers they had. These flotilla ships which would be full of stores, full of stocks, and were pretty much their floating supply base, because if you need this supply base to keep up with the fleet, and they probably need to go into a little harbour to do it. And the trouble is, you can't rely on every harbour having the facility, so you just have your supply ship going with you and acting as your sort of dock wherever you need to dock. So they're kind of like HMS Unicorn was for the Fleet Air Arm, were the supply ships for these little flotillas. Jeff Miller, did we talk about HMC Esquina and HMC Sangue yet? Modified A-class COs went from commanders pre-war to acting it during the war. Yeah. A-class are fun ships. They do have a lot of histories. Dutchman, the good thing of having many ships is you need many captains, making it more likely good people can reach the top. Yeah, but it also means you get some real whoopers. But the big thing about destroyers for the Royal Navy was it allowed them to give commands to relatively junior officers, i.e. lieutenant commanders and commanders. And it's the same with submarines. If you're looking at the U's and the smaller submarines, they're often be commanded by lieutenants. And then the bigger submarines would have lieutenant commanders and this sort of thing to give them experience. Now, Jeff Wheeler, D-Class started the war in Far East in 1929. What is their role in a war with Japan? To start off with, they'd be the initial protection force for the aircraft carrier there, whichever one it is. Then they would form a flotilla with any cruisers on Singapore, probably, and be part of the force base there until the fleet arrives. And so they're pretty much their primary job is to make sure the Malacca Strait stay clear of Japanese submarines, and they would have done that very well. They practiced that a lot. So their plan was to go active Aztec sweeps the whole way through the straits and make sure that there was no nasty surprises waiting for them. Golden Eagle. America won't be going to war again, not even a Cold War. Do you know something we don't? Because frankly, I sincerely doubt that. I'm sorry to say, but I doubt that. Ian Carr, off topic, but was carrier HMS Formidable launching herself bad luck? Well, she survived World War II fairly well. She did get bashed a couple of times, and she had that fun during that raid in Crete. But she did fairly well, so I'm going to say it was more her eagerness to get to the enemy. Richard Hughes, Dr. what do you think the best foreign destroyer was at the start of World War II? I could go with the Fletchers. That's always the easy option, but I'm going to check the name. Because it is a bit obscure. And get you a picture of her. I'm always partial to some of the Dutch vessels, and in this case, they're the Tjerk Hiddes class, Gerald Canaver, Isaac Swears, Philip van Elmond, and Tjerk Hiddes. And the reason I like them is because they're another attempt to produce a cruiser destroyer, in my opinion. As you can see, this vessel, Banket, if you can't probably make it out in the picture, has actually got, in this picture, a lovely seaplane on the back, a float plane on her. So she's pretty much acting in the cruiser role. There you go. I think they're pretty cute. I like the Dutch ones. They're good ships. Juno 191, didn't she kill someone when she launched herself? I'm never quite sure. I think she injured someone, definitely, but I don't know if she killed anyone. Mike, how do you aim torpedoes? I would assume some sort of rangefinder and method of judging speed? Yes, but at one point in the period, it's kind of like aiming cannon in the Napoleonic era, in that there is a officer or a chief petty officer staring at a sight going, yeah, they're there, adjusting, yeah, fire, that's their speed. It's quite a fun process. It gets more advanced as time goes on and more communication gets into it, but really it's not really the same level as guns, as we call them. In terms of why not use light cruisers as flotilla leaders? Why build destroyer leaders? Because that will interfere with your cruiser tonnage. Although they use light cruisers usually for multi-flotilla operations. Steam White, read DD Commander, seeing masses of Ds full of reservists and sea cadets. Happy to have those smaller Ds covering convoy flanks and rear. He thanked each vessel after he arrived safe. Stephen Wilson, the Gonigal, never assert anything about anyone. If you can recall, 1930s there was never going to be enough war. Look how that worked out. That is the point I made earlier in, I think it's part 1. One of the classes of better summary actually was the C class. It's in part 1, and they basically get cut short completely because there wasn't going to be a war. In 1929, they said there wasn't going to be a war. In a decade, you have another world war. Basically, when you have a cruiser being used as a flotilla leader, they're not used as a flotilla leader. Usually used by the rear admiral destroyers, who will have multiple flotillas on his command. So you have to the rear admiral will have his staff in a light cruiser. It's not using the cruiser as a flotilla leader. It's using the cruiser as a flotilla's leader. So you usually have there's usually light cruisers around the Harwich force, and they'd usually, when they went out, when about 3 or 4 destroyer flotillas went out, you'd have a couple of cruisers along as the rear admiral and his deputy, and also to act as enforcers should there be any really particularly rough German ships out there bashing up our destroyers. Go on, Eagle. Not against another major power anyway. No? Why do you say that? Wars against major powers happen. In the nicest way, peer-on-peer conflict is not unknown and has happened even in quite recent times. It might not have happened for a while, but that doesn't mean I think it won't happen. I would hope it doesn't, but I don't. You never know. You have to always remember, it depends who's the person in the White House and who's the person in the other place, wherever they are, making decisions. And if they make the wrong decisions or guess wrong about the other's intentions, it can lead to all sorts of fun. Jeff Beeler, was there much of a Royal Canadian River class, much of a Royal Navy Canadian River class discussion? Most of the A's to I's ended up doing ASW in Canadian Navy, I think. Not really. Not all of them ended up in the Canadian Navy. A lot of them did, but not all of them by any stretch of the imagination. The C's end up as, according to this book, the Fraser class rather than the River class. Thankfully, I had them. As did Kempenfelt. As for the rest, yeah, they get involved, but they don't all end up with the Canadians entirely at all. In fact, most of the I class seem to end up with the Royal Navy and stay with them. Bishop, there is an overlap between fast, big destroyers and small cruisers, like the Trident Daring class. Pretty much, and that's part of the reason why you have, it's going to sound strange, different approaches. And one of the interesting things is the Tribal class were actually considered for the Rear Admiral destroyers. They were considered for it. The rear admiral destroyers kept fighting against them. The Royal Navy weren't really bothered about it because by the time it came to World War II, they told the rear admiral destroyers there wasn't going to be a rear admiral destroyers, really. In that there would be that position, and you'd be administratively responsible for the destroyers, but you'd probably be in operations, you'd be a rear admiral, probably commanding a mixed force of cruisers and destroyers, or as deputy on that operations, rather than actually commanding the destroyers as part of a mass fleet, because, again, Jutland isn't expected to happen again. Juno 199, that's fuck. So what you're saying is that HMS Football had the attitude of a triable, i.e., and pain in the neck to sink and wanted to get at the enemy and kept coming back for more. Pretty much. That would describe quite a lot of Royal Navy warships of this period. We all hope for World War III, but, no, we all hope for peace, not World War III. But as Bijan says, we're not fond of the idea, but we have to prepare for it. And I also, it's going to sound strange, I have a lot of things can happen below the level of war. And that's what I think is going on at the moment, and probably going to go on most of the time from now on. Turning 3 East Indies, we like floats so we could spot pirates and other troublemakers. Yes, and they do a good job. And they look cute. Calm, Doug Clark. Sorry I'm late. I've been researching the fate of the 2 old gate guards at Castle Martin thanks to J.C. Richardson. I know what happened, and it's amazing that our small community now have access to. Yeah, it's cool. That's what the whole point I enjoy Discord. Ian Carl, what service did the Dutch destroyers you refer to have in World War II? What service did the Dutch destroyers you refer to have in World War II? They actually did quite a lot of stuff with the Royal Navy. The Isaac swears, especially, they like to end up with the tribal class. They end up doing most of the convoy work and taking part in some fleet actions. They fight in the Far East. They fight in the Mediterranean. They're all over the place, really. They're good ships, the Dutch ones. Trent Telengo, how badly were the pre-World War II UK DD classes impacted by high-angle control directors lacking of true tachymetry course? Not as badly as you'd think, because actually most of the destroyers didn't have high-angle control systems. They had the fuse-keeping clock, which was an adapted version of the hacks because it was simpler, though. It allowed for far more human intervention, which could rectify the lack of the tachymetric stuff, and turned out to be very easy to implement radar upgrades on the fuse-keeping clocks. Golden Eagle, stop trying to wind people up. Oh, good lord. Right. Aaron, how was the flotilla leader expected to command both his ship and his squadron? Commanding both at the same time sounds nearly impossible. It was certainly not fun, but it does require a certainly good quality officer. And this is why you get the Philip Vians and these sort of things coming up for destroyers. And also another reason why destroyer officers start to get command of the fleets, because they get command roles early. They're a captain already with command of, and they might be a commander, and they might have 3 other destroyers under their command. Which sounds really strange, but let me explain. So you'd have 9 destroyers. You'd have a captain in charge as the destroyer fleet in the flotilla leader. But you could have 2 to 3 vessels would be designated as secondary leaders, and they'd be under the command of commanders. And the rest of the destroyers might well be under the command of lieutenant commanders. So a commander could have experience in charge of them. And also, if suddenly all the commanders were gone, then one of the most senior lieutenant commander would be in charge. And they'd actually practice this. So this meant destroyer officers get early on a lot of experience in terms of commanding and coordinating fleets from a very, very junior rank. And therefore, usually the captain has to have a very good XO, because the captain on a destroyer, or the captain of a destroyer flotilla, his executive officer has to also be able to run the ship. So that acts as another accelerant, because that means that then there's an officer in there, and to a lesser extent the ones underneath the commanders as well, the XOs, have to step up far more in the running of the ship than they would under normal circumstances. So it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. You take the best officers because they've got to have the most, do the most work, and then you give them the most experience so they become the best officers. And it works like that. It's a constantly self-fulfilling prophecy. Keep going on. JP, what extra staff does a flotilla commander get? Usually an extra lieutenant to help their signals, and about 10 or so other people to assist. Various specialists, the flotilla engineering officer, the flotilla medical officer. Remember, most destroyers go to sea, they don't have a doctor aboard. The flotilla leader will carry a doctor for the entire flotilla in this period. So it's fun. So they're sort of they're the extra people. Trent Lenko, the USN Mark 37 director seems to have eclipsed all other major power DD designs in World War II. It is very, very good, but again, if you look at its first versions which come out, it's, as sort of discussed, it's based on one premise, and the hacks is based on a different premise. And that's the problem. It's not so much the technology in both, it's the way the technology is applied due to the premise they're based on. So the premise is wrong, which leads to the hacks, which is why the Mark 37 is so much better. But the interesting thing is the fuse-keeping clock is a sort of in-between between the two, and that's also pretty darn good. And the British keep on developing the fuse-keeping clock, and arguably the fuse-keeping clock, the far less famous control system, is the basis and the precedent of what most modern British systems are now based on in terms of electronically, in terms of their preferencing and structuring. Steamlight Battle Armada DD charge, greatly aided by its central control, allocated rapid targeting, and while commander chase splashes to get close enough for torpedoes, lots of old-fashioned smoke color. Yeah, that always works. Jeff Ealer, Dutch destroyers of World War II mostly sunk defending Java in 1942. Sadly enough, yeah, that happens to a lot of them. Martin Doherty, Carl when I was there, the Churchill was up to the top of the camp in the vehicle park. Could actually get inside and a bit of fun. I remember the Centurion in the gate. Oh, that does sound cool. Go on, Eagle. The more you say these things won't happen, the more I get worried about them. Let's stop tempting fate and talking about this one, okay? It's kind of off topic to today. William Cox, Japan's invasion of North China gave the US excuse to enact sanctions, cutting off the refined gasoline and lead additives so necessary to get to high-performance aircraft. To an extent, yes. William Cox, the Allies had 115 octane gasoline, while Germany and Japan had to do with 87 octane. That does help, but also, actually, in the center range, higher octane fuel also wears out your engines faster in this period. Which is why, if you want to see a fun video, there is somewhere on YouTube a video of the second Merlin engine being tested on the ground, blowing up because they get the mixture wrong. Jeffy, look, quite a few though. The River class was 2A class, 5C class, 2D class, 1E class, 2F class, 1G class, and 1H class. Yes, that is quite a few, but yeah, that's a lot, Jeff. No means all of them by a long way. It's a few, but yeah. The whole C class was actually it's actually 4 C class and Kempenfeld, their flotilla leader, which is C class but only technically so. Calhoun, Martin Doherty's book, Martin Doherty, the Centurion is gone. It's now a Chief Mark 11 and Leopard 1 as the Churchill able to be seen by public. Oh, nice. Oh, cool. Don Fritz, looks like Japan have a friend in the I swear it's not a carrier club with Korea. Oh, always. You didn't think Korea was going to let Japan build it without them getting involved, did you? Eamon, how did the Fubuki class influence the design of the British destroyers? Not as much as you'd think, okay? This is one of the problems. When we're talking about design these days, and if you're a historian and you want to make a quick thing, you go, they've got connection that they look at this design and that influences this design. And to an extent, you do evaluate other nations' designs and you do say, well, how much speed are they getting? What are they doing? This. But you also have to remember who you're designing for. It's the classic example I give is the Royal Navy in the Napoleonic War. When everyone's going, the French designing their ships according to mathematical principles, and they're producing great ships. Everyone knows it, so they're great ships. They're far better than British ships. Every time the British capture a ship, it goes into a British dockyard and basically gets rebuilt and comes out looking fairly different to accommodate what Britain needs. So the perfect ship for France, designed along the perfect mathematical principles that produces a great ship, an amazing ship for the French, does not fulfill the requirements of the British. Even though it's considered a great ship by the French and a great ship in the papers when Britain is talking about what it needs to build new ships, it needs to copy this design, because of the realities of operations. So again, Fubuki class has an impact. I don't think they have a massive impact because the British pretty much lock into a standard of what they want to build and they keep building it and they're developing from that standard. That suits them and their style of warfare. I was Juno 191. Did the tribal set the modernist standard for British did of the time? Pretty much. It started off the next generation of destroyers. And I would say it sort of skips into what's called, I would call the war generation destroyers. But it does start off a whole sort of building process. Don Fritz, what happened to these in small sea islets of the Yugoslavian Navy after they got overrun by the Germans? I know the Greeks made a run for Egypt. I think some of them, I think most of them ended up in being taken over by the German Navy. I seem to remember something like that. Abasasi, the Dutch Caliber class were unlucky, actually. Isaac swears in 42, Gerald Caliber captured by Germans, other two demolished during World build, so they won't be captured. Unlucky, but still nice-looking ships. I was asked which was my favourite. You don't have to pick a lucky ship. You have to say which one you like. William Cox, we consider those things we see bandied about in literature and documentaries. Humans love to follow meme. Well, until another one distracts us. Yeah, that's always the case. Right, and let's see. Any more destroyer questions come up? Oh. Voice chat's being arranged in Discord. Any other questions? Let's go down. Mike, did the free navies have ammunition resupply issues? They did, but what the Royal Navy tended to do, and the Americans also helped them with this, was refit them with with British guns. That's actually what happens to the Isaac Swears and quite a few other ships as well. They get refitted, or luckily in the case of the Polish ones, they're using pretty much British guns anyway. Mm-hmm. William Cox, HMS Cannon, the best one-kit kill of the war. Probably. Maybe. Martin Doherty. Yeah, I'm on Discord, mate. Depends. Jeff Beeler. How hard was it to shift from the quad pom-pom to the twin 40mm Bofors and destroyers? Could have been done faster. It was done as fast as they could get hold of the Bofors. That's the thing. It's as fast as you can get hold of the 40mm. The big problems in World War II weren't necessarily the fitting of it or the tonnage or the difficulty. That was actually usually quite quick fixes. It's actually the supply and building the 40mm. It's supply and building of the weaponry. The reason the pom-pom lasts so long is because it is well supplied. So this is my point often when we're talking about the future wars, and the joke is that the Third World War will that doesn't matter what the Third World War is fought with. The Fourth World War will be fought with rocks and sticks. The answer is the Fourth World War will probably be fought with whatever's actually finally coming off the production line from the Third World War because it's taken so long to come. Pigeon, what did the RN think of the destroy the French Navy? They look impressive. They looked impressive. British were never quite sure how they were supposed to operate outside the Mediterranean, but they looked impressive. They did okay. Basically, the French destroyers were very good at what the French Navy wanted them to do, but they were not good at what the Royal Navy wanted its destroyers to do. Be back in a second. Oh, good. More questions have arrived. Okay. Strub, Doctor, was the destroyer culture similar across all nations? I being elite, breeding senior officers? No, it wasn't. In fact, the Royal Navy's a little bit unique in considering them an elite and treating them as such. Other navies are... Depends on what they're focused on. The Americans during World War II certainly built themselves up into an elite, but they aren't in the interwar period. The Japanese... Germans definitely not. Italians are a bit weird when it comes to their destroyers. So when an opposing navy like Germany takes control of an ally-using an ally ship, how does that work? Do you need to translate all the controls? How do you train it or worse, repair it? You basically just pointed to all the problems. Translation of documents is critical, and a lot of structure, a lot of work, a lot of technical work. What was the Richard Hughes? What was the most innovative pre-World War II destroyer? Well, we're doing the pre-tribals today, and I would usually say it's the H class, which is actually as appropriate as next to me at the moment. But if we're talking about pre-World War II, I have a soft spot for the I class in terms of destroyers. Some of the early American ones are fairly cool, but everyone innovative in terms of destroyer means different things. You know, what you're talking about in terms of destroyer designs of most navies is they luck into what is going to be their destroyer design, what is going to be their option, their plan for how they're going to use their destroyers, and they start building them up. And most destroyers, because they're building them, they're ordering a new flotilla each year. They're actually incremental improvements. So instead of it being innovative, it's more what is the most improved. Juno 1191. Dutz Clark, would you consider the Atlanta class a light cruiser or a large destroyer? Just to prove a point to a friend. To be honest, I would say the Atlanta class are kind of like the Didos, which I consider more. It's going to sound strange. I consider the Tribals a light cruiser. I consider the Didos to be a sort of destroyer in terms of the way they're crammed with weaponry into their as much weaponry as they can into their hull. And I'd say the Atlantas sort of fit into that category as well. So I'd say they're a destroyer in cruiser form, rather than a cruiser in a destroyer form. William Cox, as Good Doctor points out, having the 2 years grace allowed US and Sumners to vastly outperform the French super destroyers in almost every respect. Yep. There is a Polish guy who started as commander of Austro-Hungarian 80-ton TB-37 Vuga, then SMS Hus class, into all Polish Navy, retired Italy, died there in 96. Oh, cool career. This is the point. Please note in Washington Navy Treaty, you are under no circumstances, in the event of a contracting power being engaged in war, such power shall not use as a vessel of war any vessel of which may be under construction with its jurisdiction for any other power, or which may have been constructed with its jurisdiction for another power and not delivered. Please note that. You will remember me talking about that when we talk about sloops. When we're talking about everything, the Americans were very, very keen. It had to be in there. The British could not do what they did in World War One. Not at all, under any circumstances. Let's see. Right, and let's see what other questions are coming in. William Cox, 70 DDs and destroyers was good duty in the 72. It's good duty in the interwar period as well. Albazasi, well, ORP Bazanka got refitted along with 4 dual 4-inch. Previously, she had 120 million Bofors. I don't think she had 120 millimeter Bofors. ORP Berza started and ended with a French 130 minute Snyder. JNF, what's the problems with rearming destroyers 1 or 2 not more about mountings than actual weapons, e.g. 4.7 to 4.5? Not really. You could modify the 4.7 mounting to take the 4.5, and you could modify in such a way that you had the 4.5 with the higher angle. It was time in the yard to do it, because to do it on a ship, let's say you wanted to do it on a D class, okay? To modify it to 4.5s would probably have taken 6 weeks in the yards, which you can do in peacetime. If you've got 2 years of peacetime, you can take the ships out of the water service for 6 weeks and stick them in the yards for those 6 weeks. You could probably do it in Singapore. But when you've got war coming in and you have to keep up a high tempo of operation, you can't do it. It's one of the things what is the problem with having a small navy now, as Britain does, because whenever there's a rapid reaction needed, it mucks up all the maintenance schedules and all the service periods because there aren't the ships to go around. Well, when you've got war pending, you suddenly stop having long services and long maintenance. HMS Hood is a classic example. She's supposed to go in early 1939 in to have her major refit along the same size as what Rodney got. She doesn't go in for it because of what is going on in the world. It's the same with the destroyers. They're not getting the refits because... Eamon, did the RN destroyers have any design flaws? For example, IJN's top heaviness. They sort of worked most of them out. I would say they had certain issues with their engineering spaces, where they often crammed a lot of engineering plant into their engines, which made them sort of difficult to maintain, which is why the tribals are interesting, because people complain about their maintenance, but they actually had the most space and were easiest to maintain. But there again, of course, the tribals spent their whole lives going around everywhere at maximum speed, and that tends to wreck your engines. Basically, try driving your own car around the whole time at about 150 to 190 miles an hour. That'd be the equivalent of what the tribals were being asked to do. And you'll probably find that eventually it will break down far more often than if you drive around at a normal speed. Jeff Healer, how much was British War pre-design exported other than Canada, Turkey, and Brazil? Pick a nation, it ends up there. The Royal Navy are pretty much building destroyers for everyone in the world. Poland, and the designers are going elsewhere as well. So, it's going all over the places. William Cox, the Poles and Exiles put up a great fight anywhere they were employed. Yep, that they did. Mike, what destroyers were the Spanish using in the Civil War? They had various designs of destroyers that mostly were indigenous builds. But they're using a lot of equipment from other places and ideas bought from other places. Jeff Hiller, did arming destroyers with 4 single 4-inch AA guns looked into pre-war like was done later with ONP class? Yes. It was looked into. There were plans for all the things. The V&W conversions, all these things were planned pre-World War II. That's how they happened so quickly. It's not... The Royal Navy starts drawing up plans for what it would do to turn its fleet ready into World War and keep going from about 1924 onwards. They have continual plans for how they mobilize for a mass global war. The government might be planning on a 10-year rule. The Royal Navy had no such belief because it couldn't afford to. Because the government's politics could change within 5 minutes. In 1929, the government's saying we can cut destroyers and new build ships because there's not going to be a war for at least another 10 years. Unfortunately, it turned out to be right. In 10 years' time, there was another major war. But the government changed its mind in about 5 years and was going, we haven't built enough ships. It's all your fault. You haven't been recommending to build enough ships. And the Navy's going, well, give us the money, we'll build them. Yeah, I apologise if I have asked this before, but did the RN ever build AA destroyers like similar to the Akizuki class? The RN did build a lot of ships, a lot of destroyers with 4-inch and double 4-inch guns, which were AA fit, and how they would call what they would call an AA destroyer. So they were mostly built in wartime, though, not in peacetime, because again, it sounds like in wartime you can build a dedicated AA destroyer, because you're operating in large enough flotillas, you know where you're going to be fighting. In peacetime, with your forces all spread around the world, you need more the ships need to be general purpose, because they're not sure what they're going to be fighting in the initial months, how it's going to be. So you build general purpose warships. And that is often the thing that people go, they weren't building this. Well, a lot of the builds do have the specific sorts of builds are built in scenarios where they can afford to. When you're the Royal Navy and thinking about fighting across the whole world, there is a limit to how you can approach matters. William Cox, psychological experimentation consent, unless you're a billionaire or a national political figure, even though it's unethical. Carmen Gaswick, did you see Did you see any post-war one British evaluation of the Terra class DDs? Yeah, there was some evaluation that went on. Again, the British will take what ideas they think are good, but they often will go, "Yeah, it's a good idea, something to remember in mind, but do we want to do it because does it fit with what we need?" The British are quite good at that. There are other navies which are less good at going, "Oh, that looks really cool. We don't have that. Well, we have to build it." And then they get it and go, "Oh, what are we doing? What are we going to do with this? Where does it fit in our plans?" Juno 199, why did I imagine a bunch of tribals going in battle with doomed eternal songs? The only way everything they fear is you, blasting the background. They would have loved that song. Jane, free Article 17. So we simply welcome the vessels into our fleet completely with crew. Never say clauses could not be circumvented. We had many ideas of how to do it. Many, many ways. And the Americans were going, Bush went, we're in the middle of a war. Shut up. Abazasi, Polish Navy pre-war is generally equipped with stuff from Bofors. 120mm was used by Griff. Both guns were used on Hell Coaster Battery. Interesting. See what? Seems all new build USN ships got 40mm and 20mm, and all ships for repaired got new air guns before they left. By 43, with battle weary, every ship's finally got dock time to rearm AA suite, and that helps. But remember, it's by 43. The other thing is the phenomenon of nominative determinism. So you get neurologist called Brian, doctor, nurse. I also know a urologist who's called Mr. Dick. That's disturbing. William Cox, the machinery and manufacturing capacity for the M1 and M2 40mm took time to create and integrate production. The story of the 40mm gun in USN service is race against time. It's a race against time for everyone, these 40mm. That's the thing. To get the air defense, it's not just you have to design it, you have to put it in, you have to have the time to put the ships in it. It's all these things come into as a factor. Jeff Peter, why did the Canadians buy destroyers rather than cruisers like Australia and New Zealand? Because the Canadians were cheap. Literally, that was it. They thought it was cheaper to support and sustain destroyers, so that's what they bought. And then they ended up with about the third largest navy in the world by tonnage by the end of World War II, because they were doing so much of the escort and then submarine operations in the Atlantic. How are destroyer floaters expected to act in a fleet engagement? Well, if you have a massed fleet engagement, the idea is they would form up on the wings and would basically advance in group, fire their torpedoes, and it'd be a sort of wing attack. Basically, imagine it's like your cavalry are all loaded with blunderbusses, and they charge in and fire, boom, and then run away. That was the idea in a massive fleet engagement. The reality is, as World War II develops, though, is that it's very rarely like that. It's usually more battles taking place around convoys, around fleet actions, and the fleet actions which are taking place are at sort of long range, so the destroyers aren't really acting like in that way. But they still use their torpedoes, especially when they're being used in offensive patrolling and operations to take out enemy ships and enemy merchant ships, enemy warships. Yeah, they get hit with their torpedoes. Battle of Cape Bon is a good example to look up at that. Let's see. William Cox, Canada had a strategic picture centered around the continent. DDs are a better option for that. For them, their strategic. It's also there are other reasons, but it is basically they're cheap. They don't want to get involved in cruisers in the interwar period, and then by the time they're doing actually arming in the 1930s, it's destroyers which are all necessary. So they're getting the destroyers. But yeah, it is. They are offered cruisers at certain points, and they don't take them. Airmen, and did the RN expect to use them as commerce raiders too? Destroyers occasionally. When you're looking at the bigger ones, they do certainly get that sort of as an option. My friend Madeline, we never actually called her Mad as a shortening, but probably should have. Butcher was at one point the on-call surgical house officer at a hospital. Fun times. Jeff Bealer, why does the philosophy of destroyer leader change so much from giants to barely different and back to giants? Well, that's one of those interesting things. They start off as giants in World War I because they're used as light cruisers. And then when it's the interwar period and you're starting developing them, they, to accommodate the space of basically everything that's being built, and everything that needs to be added in for the flotilla leader, they have to be slightly bigger, so they become much. There's a difference. There's 180 tons or something different sometimes. But then, as the destroyers themselves grow, well, the difference doesn't need to be so much there because they already have the space in their design to take the stuff for that the flotilla leader has. And then, of course, you have the tribals come along, and the tribals are technically flotilla leaders, but they are, of course, used as sort of super destroyers, as light cruisers, and they grow again because they're using that size to carry more and basically these big emphasis ships. So it's down to the scenario created by treaties, because I think if the treaties hadn't existed, I'm fairly sure, in terms of their limitations on destroyers, I'm fairly sure the Royal Navy would have been quite happily churning out destroyers all roughly of tribal class design size by about 1934. And I think you'd have had every single one, and you just had difference. It would have been, some would have had three double guns with two quad or two quin, probably two quin torpedo launchers, and that would probably have been the standard for all of them. They'd all had three double guns and two quin torpedo launchers. That would probably be what the British would have gone with, but that wasn't what was available, so they built what they could, and that gave forth to the tribals, which developed into general purpose destroyers. Simon, guess worse could be like Blackadder and have. Oh, good lord. Juno 191, Dr. Luck, have you heard about the US destroyer crew that got into a fist fight with a U-boat crew in the Middle Atlantic? That honestly wouldn't surprise me if it happened. There's some really weird things happen in the Battle Atlantic. But I hadn't heard about it before this, no. Bigrum, did changing technology or the shrinking Navy change destroyer tactics post-war for the Royal Navy? It was a bit of both. It was also the changing reality. Destroyers were changing their role in terms of their position in the fleet and what they were for. And the first reaction was the anti-submarine fast destroyer, and then there were all the destroyers converted rapidly to what are sort of super frigates. And then they sort of start working on other things and start thinking, what are we going to use destroyers for? And that's what changes. When you've got the size of the Navy shrinking and destroyers taking on more and more of the cruiser role, that changes how you're treating the destroyers themselves. And it's no longer torpedoes, it's now the age of missiles, and that changes. You don't need to charge in and line. The missiles reorientate themselves to a large extent. The torpedoes, even the big ones they're sort of putting on the daring class, don't do that quite as well. Doctor, how long could interwar destroyers stay at sea before they needed resupply? Well, they could do usually it's about 4,800 nautical miles is the average for the pre-tribals. Then it quickly goes up to 6,000 and higher nautical miles at 15 knots. So they're probably looking at about 2 to 3 weeks worth of supplies usually carried. And that's what they're to an extent thinking about. But remember, you are also got developing in this period the first at-sea replenishment going on. And whilst they're not sure they can do it with ammunition and large parts, they are starting off for fuel and food quite soon. So things start to get better quite quickly. And they have lots of freezers and other equipment in them to keep the food nice and fresh for the crew, or at least edible. William Cox, most DDs of pre-war vintage had short legs in terms of fuel and food for crew. Across the pond one way, and then they need to refuel at the least. There's not being able to do about 4,000 odd miles across the Atlantic is not really short range. Don't take this the wrong way, but there are ships with a lot shorter built at one point. That's one of the interesting things with the interwar period and the World War One destroyers. The difference in range between them and the World War Two ones is colossal. And I think if you're able to go 4,800 miles or 6,000 nautical miles, that's not that bad. Cruisers are mostly doing 8,000 nautical miles at their cruising speed. And it is at the cruising speed. You always have to remember it's what's operating able to do at the cruising speed. Uh, Raw Bulwa, hello for starters. I think this might be your first ever question. How come the RN uses so much Greek mythology for its ship names? Honestly, because the RN are strange. No, there's a more serious one. It was adopted in the Napoleonic era when they were looking for a lot of ship names, and Greek mythology was very much in vogue. And it basically made the officers and men sound more cultured than they actually were, probably. It was something which was considered rather nice. Plus, the Greeks have a nice range of sea monsters and sea gods, which are quite cool to name things after. Although I'm not sure how Minotaur gets there, I really don't. Let's see. Daniel Freeman, Donald Fritz. Sorry if it sounds stupid. There's no such thing as so stupid in these questions. Well, none I've seen so far. Why do missile torpedoes? Why no missile torpedo? Like shoot it as a missile and drop in the water a few miles away from the closing weapon or something. I think they're in development. I think the Russians have something which does that, but I don't think anyone's got around to it. This is one of the other troubles when you've had quite a long period of peace, and we've gone through several generations of systems which haven't yet been tested in war. And I have a fear. My theory is that there will be a rapid acceleration. I have a thinking that's going to come in at some point. But you must also remember that the British now have ammunition for their 30mm cannon, the radar cannon, which go on fitted on most of their frigates and destroyers, which actually will target things underwater. It's not amazing, but it's fairly good, and there is therefore close-in weapon system for dealing with torpedoes, unless the torpedo goes deep enough and comes up. So, and you've got you've got anti-torpedo countermeasures, you've got all sorts of things you can launch. So that's the thing. I think that no one's really put a lot of effort into it, but I think there's already people thinking about counters because it is a likely concurrence at some point. There are rocket-assisted torpedoes, ASROC and SUBROC, but I'm not sure you could those were really ever practiced that much in the surface of capability, and not many nations deployed them. But, that was the Western equivalent. Then if a British captain who told the Japanese to get... Oh, yeah, probably. And 20 more minutes before I go off to Mysteries of the Deep and to get my tea, because so far I haven't had lunch today. Or tea. So tea will be really quite nice. Jim Hen, Duncan, final iron cutlass pattern was the 1900 IRC. A light one, I think. Jim Hen, final withdrawn from official service in 1936. It wasn't withdrawn. They were still using cutlasses even in World War II. There are several actions, and the famous boarding of the Tsingtao, the operations at Tsingtao, etc. They also get issued cutlasses as well as guns. So yeah, withdrawn, I'm not quite sure. The ships still seem to have quite a large supply of them, and to this day, the Royal Navy ships still seem to have quite a good content of swords if you go looking and know where to look for them. Jeff Beeler, what action did destroyers see between the wars? Mainly it was counter-piracy operations. They had quite a lot of that. Royal Navy destroyers occasionally had interesting conversations with their Italian and French counterparts about exactly where they could go. They also had conversations with their Japanese counterparts about where they could go. And occasionally their American counterparts about, are you lost again? No, we are meant to be here. Well, there are rocks that way. Oh. Do you want to borrow one of our charts? We have our own charts. You were heading for rocks. Okay, thank you. The Royal Navy was not really appreciative of the American Navy keep turning up in their side of in the China station and keep getting lost. There are all these fun official write-ups of these incidents where it's Lieutenant Commander so-and-so helped, kindly assisted the Americans in finding their way because they had some trouble. And there's also the times when the Americans are actually quite nice to Brits because the Americans tend to have a lot of ice cream. So we tend to help them out and they provide ice cream, which the Royal Navy was very happy to help them with. So there may be some rumors that some of the times they were told there were rocks up ahead was completely fake so that they get ice cream. But we'll leave that to one side. That's fun little, tete-a-tetes going on. Hmm. JP, how did World War One experience affect destroyers' tactics and design after war? It's, as I said, when I at the beginning, it's the Harwich experience, it's the convoy experience which affects them. So, anti-submarine warfare capabilities and melee fighting, where they think that the torpedoes are very much for dealing with enemy capital ships, enemy cruisers, and it's going to be a snap firing. So you want the torpedoes to have as visible a mounting and as flexible a mounting as possible, and the ship to be as maneuverable as possible in terms of its ability to get its torpedoes to face the enemy. William Cox, between wars, the Spanish Civil War spread neutrality patrols run by different European powers. DDs figured heavily in these. Yeah, but unfortunately, that happens a little bit late for it to have much of an impact on design prior to World War II. It does start to be factored into design, but most of these ships were designed. Tribal class destroyers take part in those patrols. That's how late the Spanish Civil War is in comparison into the run up World War II, as far as the Royal Navy is concerned. Benlor, I have heard the interwar destroyers referred to as standard class destroyers. Is this accurate? No, it's a historian trying to make a claim. Basically, there's standard battleships, so there must be standard destroyers. Well, each one's, as I've said, each one is an evolution of the ones which preceded it. So on that count, you can call them a standard. They do have a similar armament, so they can call them a sort of standard on that front. But actually, each design is another level beyond, another evolution on beyond. So I wouldn't call it a standard. I would call it a sort of profile, and it's the grouping of the interwar destroyers. I think I gave them the generational terms. Do you know 191? That's what. How stupid were the submarines with battleship guns? It looks like the saying is it's stupid, but it works. Applies here. It was an attempt to try. They usually use cruiser guns more often, not actually. And it was an attempt to basically create a cruiser submarine that could do the role of a cruiser. You can understand the idea, but you know, it didn't really work. The Surkov is probably the one which comes closest to working, and that really doesn't work. Seemwhite, haven't heard in the story in a while, but the USD 51 Bulkai, they cry repel all borders after it rammed U-66 and its crew swarmed out to attack the DE. Fun times. Jemek, evolution in peacetime is versus revolution in wartime. British destroyer class in interwar are Arleigh Burke's fights. Sounds similar. Yeah, I would go. That's very similar. Very much Arleigh Burke fights. Jeff Billett, did Michael Clapp ever use a cutlass? Listen to the podcast next week. See what? You're welcome. Da-da-da. Danny Freeman, the heavy gun submarines were a concept nixed by treaty. It might have worked for convoy attacks, as far faster reload the guns than torpedo tubes. Yes, but if you get any damage to your pressure hull, which you will likely if you're fighting on the surface, you aren't a submarine anymore. You're a slow-moving target on the surface. That was basically the big problem. Vision, classical names are cool for warships, but RN should have done more research. Naming a cruiser after a woman carried away by Zeus is a bit questionable, even for the Victorians. Don't you think sailors carry their ladies away? Or, now of course. But that was what they're probably thinking about that time. Take care, Emma. Heavy gun subs. I'm not saying the concept would have worked, but it was never allowed to be developed as the idea was blocked by treaty and then superseded by torpedo development. To an extent. More importantly, it just wouldn't have worked. It's the whole pressure hull thing. Jeff Beeler, why the emphasis on high-speed minesweeping versus ASW mine laying? How was the sweeping to be done? Basically, the idea was, Jeff, that they would have two destroyers. They'd link up their gear and they'd do a high-speed run for a minefield. And hopefully neither of the destroyers would get hit by a mine. But the idea was if they went fast enough, they were small enough that they would be past the mine before their wake set it off. And they capture a whole load of mines in a sort of crawling set. And it's a fun idea of stuff I would never want to be involved in at all. In fact, if someone told me to do it, I would positively hand in my notice then. And I go, if you want me to die, just give me a gun, I'll do it. It'll be quicker and less painful. And they did do ASW. They were doing mine laying. There was emphasis on these as well, but mine sweeping was considered to be likely a very, very high need requirement because they're expecting both mines to be used to try and stop fleets getting places, which they were. Juno 1191. Dr. Clark, any good sources on the Battle of River Plate? Researching for the stream. There is a very good book written by the ambassador. Oh, what's his name? But basically, the British ambassador, Millington Drake, writes a book about the Battle of the River Plate, and it's full of excellent sources and very interesting to read from both sides. Donna Fritz. Yeah. Carl Gaspard, a tad late. Missile torpedo. The Russian SN-15, 16, and Italian automatic torso are still already in service. I know. They're out there, but, you know, it's using them for that role. Strub, Doctor, what asset did the interwar destroyers fear the most? Probably battlecruisers. Honestly, if you're a destroyer coming face to face with a battlecruiser, it's probably a nightmare. Cruisers, you stand a chance against with your torpedo range versus their gun range, especially if you're going fast enough. Battlecruisers, battleships, if you're caught close, solo, that's not fun. Aircraft later, when it comes later, it's 1940 that the aircraft starts to dominate and become problematic. William Cox, cruiser subs were meant for guerre de course, war against commerce. Yes, having with a float plane for searching and spotting. Guns were cheaper and more dependable than interwar torpedoes, after all. Yes, and yes. But when you're fitting 8-inch guns, what are you going to be using them for? That's the thing. The British are quite keen on it, but they're fitting 4.7 and 4-inch and 3-inch guns. You're dealing with merchants. If you're on the surface engaging warships, you're in trouble. Simon, always thought the movie Guns of Never Own, being able to sink a group of fast EDs is ridiculous. Even heavily loaded EDs, big guns can't track that fast. It depends on the ranges you're talking about, but yeah. Don't worry, Stafford. Thank you for coming. Half Don't worry. There's about another 7 minutes, so I'm answering questions. thank you again, as always, to everyone who subscribes. Thank you to all the super chats. Thank you to all the people who are patrons and all those things. You really are keeping me in my books at the moment. And thank you to everyone who's pre-ordered my book. That's very kind of you. Hopefully it won't be delayed as much as they're talking about. I think I'll manage to fix it and fix their issues with it. Because I thought I'd fixed all one set of issues, and then they've popped up something else, and I'm going, But I get it done. I will get it done. Greetings to Kentucky, Harvester of Sorrow. Showmack, did you really write the Deutschland class there? Seriously? The Deutschland class? Okay, we'll go over this again. The Panzerschief are not a good design. They're just not. Frankly, if you're putting an 11-inch gun in your ship, you're not giving it any advantages. It's not got the firepower to take on any battleships, and it's not got really fast enough firing to deal with most cruisers, let alone destroyers. Paul, Dr. Clark, was there some weakness in pre-war exercises that they didn't identify the deficiency in AA armament? Yes and no. Okay. The AA armament in interwar exercises does quite well. But they must remember that the point is that the RAF is running the air side of the attack, and usually they're concentrating on, they reckon the land-based aircraft will be doing high-level bombing runs. And that's what they're basing their tactics around. And the fleet air arm, to an extent, whilst they're sort of in this limbo between the Navy and the RAF for most of the interwar period until 1939. And they are trying for both, but they've got torpedoes. So you've got, the orientation is on, are we dealing with torpedo attackers or are we dealing with high-level bombers? And dive bombers don't really get enough practice against. The Royal Navy tries to practice as much as they can against them. But again, as I was talking about in the videos, the introduction videos, the trouble is with an exercise is that an exercise is a short period of time. It might be 2 or 3 days, but it's not going to be that long. So when the aircraft attack, they want to get the big kill because that's going to look good on post-exercise summary. That's going to look good on their sort of, they're talking about it for the officers. So they go after the capital ships, which means the destroyers, and for the other sort of other ships, it's just a case of you're tracking the targets and you're firing them. They're not coming for you. In wartime, when it's an ongoing long-term scenario, they're coming after you before they go after the capital ships, and that means it changes your angle of bearing. So exercises develop, because of the scenario of an exercise, develop false positives. Thank you for your hard work putting up with our questions, rambles. I enjoyed them. Doctor, was it standard practice for capital ships to always sail with destroyers escorts during the interwar period? No, not in peacetime. As a rule, the destroyers were wandering around doing other things. They would practice escorting them, and occasionally would get escorts. But often you would get, well, if you consider it, the battle cruiser force that goes around the world is made up of battle cruisers and cruisers. It isn't made up of there is no sort of destroyers there. If they needed destroyers, they'd have picked them up in the local station they went into, which would have had some destroyers there, rather than having them moving around the world. Strap, Doctor, was it standard? Answer that question. Sean Mack, it was a joke. It was the Deutschland class. Donald Fritz, how did World War II sailors work on the shit How did World War II sailors work out on ships they work at? Which ships they would work, I'm presuming? Work out which ships, Donald Fritz? I would think it's how did World War II sailors work out which ships they would work on. Usually, as a sailor, you get assigned. You might try and canvas for a transfer, but you'd probably just get assigned. And if you liked it, you'd stay in it. If you performed well, you'd probably stay in that area. If they didn't like you, they tended to kick you off to the bigger ships. Thank you. Pleasure, Yickers. Thank you, William. Hope you enjoyed it. Stuff Thompson, Dr. Clark, pre-ordering tomorrow and have to call you about your hider shirt. Didn't want to spread sad news. Looking forward to watching in total. We'll just listen for now. Oh, thank you. I was asking. Subs are unstable gun platforms, especially in rough sea. Also, limited view range. Yeah, there are all sorts of issues with submarines as gun platforms. Thank you, Angus. Good evening to you as well. Vision, pocket battleships were designed by Hollywood. Always given the enemy a big ship with a big flaw. Yeah, that does seem rather sensible. Aletsky, why don't you use long-range guns? That's what I can't understand about the destroyer, about the Panzer Chief, or about the submarines with big guns. Go on, ask Eagle. What's the difference between destroyer escorts, destroyers, and frigates? In World War II, destroyers are built as general-purpose assets. Destroyer escorts are destroyer-sized, built to full naval standards, but are built without torpedoes, so they can carry more anti-submarine warfare gear, hence their destroyer escorts. Frigates are built along semi-commercial lines, i.e. modified commercial lines. They're an advancement of corvettes. In fact, sometimes they're called twin-screw corvettes, but actually they were built to sort of semi-military naval standards, so they were frigates. And they are built for anti-submarine warfare. Nowadays, modern scenarios, it's basically people just picking a name. Donna Fritz, I could only imagine that would lead to injuries as the deck is small and cramped. Yep. But you need to keep fit in war, and they didn't have tremors. Yes, if you're working out on ships in World War II, in the interwar period, you'll be running around the ship. That was it. But also, it was a lot more. It was far more manual labor and far more labor intensive on ships than it is probably these days. So they would have to. That would part of their normal job would be far more intensive. It's intensive in different ways now. See what? Remember reading of the DDs that moved in close to D-Day, thinking Canada and British has got 4.7-inch close support, wrecked Germans, and US. Yeah, they did. DDs would get in as close as they could to provide as much fire support as they could. Sure, Mac. What about a blistering speed of 26 knots the Deutschland class has, so they can be outrun by North Carolina if you push the engines hard? There is not a single destroyer we have discussed today that hasn't been able to outrun the Deutschland class. Most of the Royal Navy's cruisers as well could outrun them. They're just, yeah. Danny Fritz, I hope I answered the question then. Second time around. Thank you. Carl Guzman, I guess cannon-armed fighter strafing Whirlwind BF-112 were also a crude surprise in addition to dive bombs. They were annoying when they came into it. Pleasure, Carl. And Shomack. For US subs, they found the 5-inch 25 was more accurate than the 4-inch or 3-inch 50s. More than likely, but again, it's a kind of interesting thing is that in the Mediterranean, especially, the Royal Navy don't tend to not stop like using guns because being on the surface is not good for your sub. When there's plenty of air to cover. Mission. On bilge pumps, I was very surprised by the semi-submersible stealth luxury Carswanger ship. I had to look it up. It seems such a strange thing. It does. It look very interesting. So, right. LED were slower, maybe 26 knots and 2 guns, 3-inch open mounts first. It depends on which Navy you're talking about with the DEs. I'd be talking about the Hunt class in the Royal Navy. Paul. Sorry to keep harping on about AA, but I read that the fabric belts of the Prince of Wales pom-pom ammunition disintegrated in the heat and humidity. Was this a known issue? Not really, if they were stored properly and looked after properly. But there were some issues in that you had some issues with these things, but they usually worked. And it was going to sound strange. Pom-pom ammunition had been going out, and fabric belts had been going out to the Far East for a long, long time by the time the Prince of Wales went out, and it had been well tested. So the fact that if that did happen on the Prince of Wales, and I have seen countering arguments from both sides of memories on that, I would say it would be rather unusual and unexpected. So I'd wonder if they got a bad batch. William Cox. Wartime DD programs were microcosms of agency when it comes to power units. Turboelectric when reduction gear capacity was stressed. Ben Laura, I always get a feeling the Deutschlands are sort of 1930s pre-dreadnoughts. I would agree to that to an extent, because they are to replace the pre-dreadnoughts. Ben Laura, and post-war, was the 3-inch 70 ever considered for a destroyer or frigate in the Iron? It was, but never actually implemented. William Cox, wartime DD programs are microcosms of exigency when it comes to power units. Turboelectric when reduction gear capacity was stressed, steam half-wise, and eventually diesel. Yeah, they have lots of things they try. Stramac, why did the RN issue tracers for AA guns? So they could see where they were shooting at night. Literally, that's it, because that's the time, especially pre-radar. Sean White, it's like Churchill tank found the leftover Sherman guns from Fireflies the best weapon. Heavy tanks that need its recoil, and it was excellently accurate. On lighted Sherman, not much. Bernard, Deutschlands seem like they were designed for the Baltic, not global commerce raiding. Light cruiser, much better, since you can't afford to fight a big warship for fear of mission kill. Not a problem, Baltic. Yeah. Right then, so I've caught up the questions. The RN did issue tracers for their AA guns, as far as I know, especially for the pom-poms and various things. Right, so I'm going to say night-night. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you. Take care. And I'm off to walk the puppy and then go and watch Mysteries of the Deep. So thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you for all your kind words. Take care. Hope you enjoyed tonight. And enjoy. And there's going to be more coming up next week. I will get round to uploading and pre-organising all the videos that are all stocked up for August. I'm sorry I haven't yet. I've just had a weird week. Royal Borough, did any DDs or larger size ship models ever lose to tanks? There were a couple of destroyers which did have some rough handling from German tanks during Dunkirk evacuations, but as a rule, they usually managed to beat up the land vessels because they had bigger, more powerful guns. So it tended to be a sensible thing if you were a tank to keep away from a warship. Bruce Murray, good dog. Sorry if I misheard this. Distracted by lesser things. That the US ASROC and SUBROC were rocket launched anti-submarine torpedoes on Wikipedia. Yes, they were. They had a theoretical anti-surface role, but it's a theoretical one. I don't think they were ever used in it. Jerickson, thanks. Unfortunately, missed this as I've been calling around looking for tanks. Enjoy. Good luck with the tank hunt. Take care, Halfster of Sorrow. Take care, Maris Marino. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you again for all the likes, the shares, the super chats, the everything, basically. Please find links to Discord and to Patreon and everything down below if you're interested.